A little girl told the billionaire, "My mum told me to come see you," leaving him stunned. But when he learned the reason behind it, everyone was moved to tears. Before we begin, comment your favorite number below. And now, let's get started. The city buzzed with life as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan. The streets were filled with the rhythmic honking of yellow taxis, pedestrians rushing to their destinations, and the occasional street performer trying to catch the attention of passers-by. It was another typical evening in New York City, where the wealthy walked past the struggling without a second thought. Among those wealthy individuals was Enrique Carter, a man who had built an empire from nothing. At 42 years old, he was the CEO of Carter International, a billion-dollar hospitality company that owned some of the most luxurious hotels across the country. His face was often featured in business magazines, a symbol of success and power. His tailored suit was always immaculate, his wristwatch a subtle yet clear statement of his wealth. To the outside world, he had it all. But those who truly knew him, if any, would say he had nothing beyond his wealth. Enrique was a man of strict discipline. Every morning, he woke at 5 a.m., worked out for an hour, and had a meticulously prepared cup of black coffee before diving into his endless meetings and negotiations. His life revolved around business, and he liked it that way. There was no room for distractions, no time for personal connections. It was efficient, controlled, and most importantly, predictable. That day, as he stepped out of a high-rise conference room in Midtown, his assistant, Mark Hastings, was already waiting for him by the entrance of his black Bentley. Mark, always organized, quickly briefed him. "Your next meeting with the investors from Dubai has been pushed to Friday," Mark informed him as he opened the car door. "And Mr. Donovan wants to schedule dinner next week to discuss the new expansion." Enrique barely nodded. "Make it happen." He was about to step inside the car when a small voice stopped him. "Excuse me, sir." Enrique didn't react at first. He wasn't the kind of man who responded to people on the streets. But then, the voice came again, clear, direct, unexpectedly bold for a child. "My mom said if there was ever a problem, I should find a man named Enrique Carter." That name froze him. Enrique turned his head, his sharp brown eyes locking onto the small figure standing in front of him. She was just a child, no older than 10 years old. Her clothes were worn out, her shoes scuffed, and her messy brown hair looked as though it hadn't been brushed in days. She clutched a small, tattered backpack, gripping it tightly as if it held something valuable. For the first time, in a long time, Enrique felt off balance. "Who are you?" His voice was calm but firm, the same tone he used in negotiations. The girl looked up at him, her large hazel eyes filled with a mixture of determination and fear. "My name is Valentina Davis." The last name hit Enrique like a punch to the gut. His face remained impassive, but his mind raced. Davis, as in Teresa Davis, a name he hadn't heard in years, a name that still carried the sting of betrayal. Teresa had been the only woman he ever truly loved, the one who had disappeared from his life without a word. He had spent months looking for her, demanding answers. When he finally accepted she was gone, he buried that part of his past beneath layers of work and success, and now, standing before him, was a little girl with her last name. "Teresa Davis?" he asked, his voice a little sharper than he intended. Valentina nodded. "My mom," she whispered. Enrique's grip on his briefcase tightened. His heart pounded, but his face remained unreadable. Teresa had a daughter. Why would she send this girl to him? Why now? Mark, his assistant, subtly stepped closer, sensing the tension. "Sir, should I—" "No," Enrique cut him off. He looked back at Valentina. "Where is your mother now?" The girl hesitated. Then her small voice wavered. "She's gone. Gone." The single word held a weight Enrique wasn't ready for. "Gone," he repeated, his voice quieter. Valentina nodded, She died a few months ago. Enrique wasn't sure what hit him harder, the shock, the anger, or the unexpected ache in his chest. Teresa was dead. For a moment, memories resurfaced. Her laugh, the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, the soft scent of her perfume lingering in the air. Then, just as quickly, he shoved them back down. This wasn't the time for nostalgia. His eyes returned to Valentina. "And she told you to find me?" Valentina nodded again. "She said you were the only one who could help me." Enrique exhaled slowly, collecting himself. "Help you how?" I don't know," Valentina admitted. "But she told me your name before she died. She said you would know." This is ridiculous. There was no way Teresa meant for him to take care of this child. She wasn't his responsibility. He had built his life without her, without needing to know what happened to her after she left. But then, why did she send Valentina to him? What was the truth she wanted him to know? There were too many questions, and Enrique didn't like unanswered questions. A moment of silence stretched between them. Then, Enrique straightened his posture, regaining his usual sharp demeanor. "I don't know what your mother was thinking," he said, his tone returning to the controlled businessman he was. "But I'm not the person you're looking for." A flicker of disappointment crossed Valentina's face, but she didn't back away. She didn't plead, didn't cry. Instead, she looked up at him with quiet determination. "She said you'd say that," Valentina murmured. Enrique froze again. Before he could say anything else, Valentina reached into her backpack. Carefully, she pulled out a small folded photograph and held it out to him. Enrique took it, against his better judgment, and slowly unfolded it. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. It was a picture of him and Teresa, taken years ago, back when they were just two young dreamers trying to survive in this brutal world. She was smiling. He was looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered. For a second, the world around him faded. Then, he clenched his jaw, shoving the photo back at Valentina. "This means nothing." Valentina didn't flinch. "I think it does," she said simply. A long pause. Then, finally, Enrique sighed. "Get in the car." Mark's eyebrows shot up, but he didn't say a word. Valentina hesitated, then nodded, climbing into the back seat. Enrique followed, closing the door behind him. As the car pulled away from the curb, he had no idea what he was getting himself into. But something in his gut told him this was only the beginning. Part 2. Clues from the past. The silence inside the Bentley was thick as they drove through Manhattan. The city lights flickered outside the tinted windows, but Enrique wasn't looking at them. His mind was spinning. Sitting beside him was a 10-year-old girl claiming to be the daughter of Teresa Davis, a woman who had disappeared from his life without explanation. A woman he had once loved deeply. A woman who, according to this girl, was now dead. He should have dropped her off at the nearest shelter and walked away. That was the rational choice, the safe choice, the Enrique Carter choice. Yet here he was, taking a child he'd never met before to his penthouse. Mark, his assistant, kept glancing at him through the rearview mirror, but didn't say anything. He knew better than to question Enrique's decisions in the moment. After what felt like an eternity, Enrique broke the silence. "You said your mother is gone." His voice was calm, controlled. "How did she die?" Valentina's small hands tightened around the straps of her backpack. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. "There was a fire." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Enrique turned to face her fully. "A fire?" She nodded. "We lived in a small apartment in the Bronx. One night I woke up, and everything was burning. The smoke was everywhere. My mum, she tried to get me out first. She kept pushing me towards the door, telling me to run." Enrique's jaw clenched. And you did? Valentina looked down at her lap, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't want to leave her, but she made me. A hollow feeling settled in Enrique's chest. He could picture it too clearly. Teresa, pushing her daughter towards safety, choosing death over leaving her child behind. The woman he once loved had burned alive while saving their daughter. If she had been alive just months ago, that meant she had been in New York this whole time. Why didn't she ever come looking for him? Did the police say what caused the fire? He asked, his voice sharper than before. Valentina hesitated again. They said it was an accident, but... My mom didn't believe in accidents. That made Enrique pause. Valentina fidgeted with the zipper on her backpack. She always told me that if something ever happened to her, if something didn't feel right, I should find you. Why? That was the one question Enrique couldn't shake. If Teresa really had left him by choice, why would she send her daughter to him in her last moments? Before he could say anything else, Valentina dug into her backpack. A second later, she pulled out a small, folded photograph, the same one she had shown him before. Enrique frowned. I already saw that. No, Valentina said quickly. You didn't look at the back. Confused, he took the photo and turned it over. There was handwriting on the back, messy, rushed. His eyes scanned the words, and for the first time in years, he felt like his heart stopped beating. If anything happens, find Enrique. He will protect you. Trust no one. Mom. His grip on the photo tightened. This wasn't just some coincidence. This was deliberate, planned. Teresa knew something was going to happen to her, and she knew it wasn't going to be an accident. The questions that wouldn't go away. By the time they reached his penthouse, Enrique had more questions than answers. He led Valentina inside, instructing Mark to get her something to eat, while he stepped into his home office. The moment the door closed behind him, he pulled out his phone and made a call. I need you to find everything you can on Teresa Davis. The voice on the other end hesitated. Sir, are you asking for a routine background check or... I want to know where she lived, where she worked, who she talked to. I want fire department records, police reports, everything. I don't care how much it costs. Just do it. There was a beat of silence. Then, understood. Mr. Carter Enrique hung up and exhaled, his fingers pressing into his temples. Something didn't add up. Teresa was in New York for years, but never once tried to contact him. She died in a fire, but she had already told Valentina not to trust anyone before it happened. And the biggest question of all, who was she afraid of? Enrique wasn't a believer in coincidences. If Teresa thought she was in danger, then that fire wasn't just bad luck. Someone wanted her gone, and now that same someone might be watching Valentina. The past left unfinished. By the time Enrique stepped back into the living room, Valentina was sitting on the couch, picking at a sandwich that Mark had given her. She looked up as soon as he entered. Did you know her? She asked, her voice quiet. Enrique didn't answer right away. He walked over and sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. Yes, he finally said. I knew your mother. Valentina studied his face, then glanced back down at her sandwich. She never told me about you. A sharp pang hit Enrique in the chest. She didn't? Valentina shook her head. She never talked about my dad, but she kept that picture. I found it in her old stuff. Enrique took a slow breath. Then why did she tell you to find me? I don't know. Her voice was softer this time, almost like she was just as lost in all of this as he was. Enrique leaned back, exhaling deeply. This wasn't just about helping a lost child. This was about answers. Teresa had spent the last decade hiding from something, and whatever she ran from, whatever she died for, it was now standing in his living room. He met Valentina's gaze. "I need to figure out what happened to your mother." She nodded. "I want to know too." A silent agreement passed between them. Enrique sat in his office, staring at the dim glow of the city skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The weight of the past pressed heavily on his chest, a suffocating reminder that the ghosts he had long buried were clawing their way back to the surface. His phone buzzed on the desk, the screen illuminating with a name he trusted, a private investigator he had hired to dig into Teresa's life. He picked up immediately. "I found something," the man said without preamble, "and you're not going to like it." Enrique's grip on the phone tightened. "Tell me." "There's a reason Teresa never contacted you," the investigator continued. "She tried, multiple times, but every attempt was intercepted." Enrique's heart pounded in his chest, but his voice remained cold, measured. "Intercepted by who?" There was a pause, the kind that spoke volumes. "Your cousin, Luis Carter." For a moment, Enrique thought he had misheard. Luis? His own blood? He had never considered him a saint, but this. He had always believed their rivalry was confined to boardrooms and business deals. He had never imagined Luis would go so far as to rip Teresa away from him. "How?" he demanded. "The letters she sent, they never reached you. Luis had them intercepted and destroyed. Phone calls, same thing. Any attempt she made to get in touch was cut off before it got anywhere near you." Enrique's breath came sharp, his muscles coiled with tension. The betrayal stung more than he expected. Luis had been a constant presence in his life. His cousin, his business partner, someone he had once considered family. But behind the facade, he had been orchestrating a scheme that not only robbed Enrique of the only woman he had ever loved, but had also led to Teresa's death. "That's not all," the investigator continued. "Teresa wasn't just forced to leave. She was threatened. Someone made sure she understood that if she stayed in New York, it would cost her." The words sent a chill down Enrique's spine. He could already feel the rage simmering beneath his skin. Who threatened her? "Luis had leverage," the investigator said carefully. "And he didn't work alone. Teresa's mother, Evelyn Davis, was involved." That name sent a fresh wave of anger through Enrique. Evelyn had never approved of him. He had been a kid with no name, no wealth, no legacy, just raw ambition and a hunger to make something of himself. To her, he had never been good enough for her daughter, but to know she had actively helped rip Teresa from his life, to know she had played a role in forcing her daughter into exile, was almost too much to bear. "She knew?" Enrique's voice was dangerously quiet. "She more than knew. She helped Luis convince Teresa that you had moved on, that you were building a future without her. She told her that you had never looked for her, that you had abandoned her. She made sure Teresa believed there was nothing left for her here." Enrique exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening into fists. He had spent years believing that Teresa had chosen to leave him, that she had walked away, left him to build his empire alone. But now, knowing the truth, that she had been manipulated, threatened, and lied to, sent a fury through him unlike anything he had ever felt before. "She didn't just leave," he muttered. "They forced her out." The investigator hesitated, and when she tried to come back, they silenced her. The words struck him like a knife to the gut. "The fire. It wasn't an accident," the investigator confirmed. "I don't have solid proof yet, but from what I've found, Teresa knew too much. She had been gathering information, looking for ways to expose what happened. She wanted to find you. She wanted you to know the truth." Enrique stood abruptly, his pulse hammering in his ears. He had spent his life making calculated moves, playing the long game, ensuring that every decision was a step toward victory. But this was personal. Luis had stolen a decade of his life, poisoned the one person he had truly loved against him, and now, it seemed, had a hand in her death. He needed proof. He needed to confront Luis himself. He stormed out of his office, finding Mark waiting just outside. His assistant took one look at his face and immediately straightened. "Sir?" "Find Luis," Enrique ordered, his voice cold, lethal. "Now." Mark didn't ask questions. He simply nodded and pulled out his phone. Within minutes, Enrique had the information he needed. Luis was at a private club in Midtown, no doubt sipping expensive whiskey, blissfully unaware that his world was about to collapse. The drive was tense, silent, the only sound the steady rhythm of Enrique's own breathing as he tried to keep his rage in check. He wasn't a man prone to impulsive decisions, but this wasn't business. This was something deeper, something that had festered for too long. When he arrived, he didn't bother checking in. He walked straight past the hostess, past the velvet ropes, and into the VIP lounge where Luis sat, laughing with a group of equally wealthy, equally corrupt men. Luis spotted him almost immediately, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he masked it with that same smug confidence he had always worn like armor. "Enrique," he greeted, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "To what do I owe this surprise?" Enrique didn't sit. He didn't waste time. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the photograph Valentina had given him, and tossed it onto the table in front of Luis. The tension between Enrique and Luis was thick, the air in the private lounge charged with unspoken threats. Luis still wore that smug grin, the kind he had perfected over years of deception. But there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something Enrique recognized instantly. Fear. Not outright panic, not yet, but the kind of unease that came when a man realized his secrets were beginning to surface. Enrique leaned forward, resting his hands flat on the table between them. "You think I don't know?" he said quietly. "You think I won't find out exactly what you did?" Luis chuckled, shaking his head. "Enrique, you've always been dramatic. You show up here, throwing accusations like it means something. Teresa is dead. You can't change that." Enrique's fingers curled into fists, but his expression remained unreadable. "She didn't just die," he said, his voice as sharp as steel. "Someone made sure she never got the chance to tell me the truth, and I'm starting to think that someone was you." Luis sighed, as if he were bored. "And what exactly do you think I did? Had her killed? That's quite an accusation, cousin." Enrique didn't take the bait. Instead, he picked up the photograph he had thrown on the table, sliding it back into his pocket. "You stopped her letters. You made sure she believed I abandoned her. You used her own mother against her, and when she tried to come back, she ended up dead in a fire that was ruled an accident. That's too many coincidences for me to ignore." Luis studied him for a moment, then leaned back in his chair, a lazy smirk playing on his lips. "Coincidences happen all the time, Enrique, and unless you have proof, you're wasting your breath." That was the problem. Proof. Enrique knew Luis was involved, but he needed concrete evidence, something that would destroy him, not just personally, but professionally, and he knew exactly where to start. Without another word, Enrique stood, fixing Luis with one final stare. "I'll find it," he promised. "And when I do, you won't be able to smirk your way out of it." Luis simply raised his glass in mock salute. "Good luck with that." Enrique turned and walked out, his pulse hammering in his ears. The moment he stepped outside, he pulled out his phone and dialed Mark. "I need a full audit of the company's financials," he said, as soon as Mark answered. There was a pause. "Sir? Go back 5 years. I want to know every single transaction that Luis has touched." Mark hesitated. "This is going to cause waves." "I don't care," Enrique said flatly. "Do it." The next morning, Enrique sat at his desk, surrounded by financial reports that Mark had compiled overnight. It hadn't taken long to find what he was looking for, a pattern of missing funds, shell companies, and carefully hidden offshore accounts. The numbers didn't lie. Luis had been bleeding money from Carter International for years. Enrique's jaw tightened as he flipped through page after page of evidence. This wasn't just embezzlement. It was meticulously orchestrated theft on a massive scale. Luis had been funneling money through subsidiaries, making it look like legitimate business expenses, all while pocketing millions. Mark, standing across the desk, exhaled slowly. "It's worse than we thought." Enrique looked up sharply. "Explain." Mark hesitated, then passed him another folder. "Luis isn't doing this alone." Enrique opened the folder and immediately recognized some of the names inside. These weren't just random business associates. They were powerful figures in the finance world, men with deep connections and the ability to bury anyone who got in their way. "They're backing him," Mark continued. "He's not just stealing money. He's building alliances. And if he's tied to Teresa's death, then this isn't just about money. It's about keeping secrets buried." Enrique's grip on the folder tightened. He had assumed Luis had been acting on his own, out of greed or jealousy. But this was bigger than he had anticipated. "They won't let me take him down," Enrique murmured, more to himself than to Mark. Mark nodded grimly. "Not without a fight." Enrique sat back, exhaling slowly. He was used to high-stakes battles. He had built his empire by being smarter, by outmaneuvering his enemies before they even saw the knife coming. But this wasn't just business. This was personal. And now it was dangerous. That night, as Enrique left the office, he noticed something unusual. A black sedan was parked across the street, its engine idling. He had never seen it before, but something about it set off alarms in his head. He walked to his car, forcing himself to move at a normal pace, but his instincts were screaming. He wasn't paranoid. He had spent too many years in this world to ignore when he was being watched. As his driver pulled away from the curb, he glanced in the side mirror. The black sedan followed, his fingers curled against his knee. They knew he was looking. They were watching him now. Mark, sitting in the passenger seat, must have noticed his change in posture. "Something wrong?" Enrique's eyes stayed on the mirror. "We're being followed." Mark shifted slightly, peeking through the mirror without drawing attention. "Do you want me to call security?" "No," Enrique said. "Not yet." He needed to know who was behind that wheel before he made a move. A competitor, a hired gun, someone connected to the men backing Luis. Whoever they weren't being subtle. That meant one of two things. They wanted him to know he was being watched, or they were waiting for the right moment to act. Neither option was good. The city lights flickered through the car windows as Enrique's Bentley cut through the night, gliding through the bustling streets of Manhattan. He sat in the back seat, his jaw clenched, his thoughts a storm of rage and calculations. His phone buzzed. Mark's voice came through the speaker. "Sir, I've arranged a security detail for you and Valentina. I don't like the fact that you were followed last night." Enrique exhaled. He didn't like it either. "Where's Valentina now?" "She's still at the hotel," Mark replied. "Safe for now, but I suggest—" "I'm picking her up myself," Enrique interrupted. "Have the car ready." Mark hesitated, then said, "Understood." Enrique ended the call and stared out the window. If Luis had gone as far as eliminating Teresa, there was no telling what he would do next. And now that Enrique was digging, now that he was too close to the truth, Luis wouldn't just sit back and watch. No, he would act. 30 minutes later, Enrique stepped into the lobby of the luxury hotel where Valentina had been staying under Mark's arrangement. The place was secure, discreet, a temporary refuge. But it wasn't safe anymore. Not after last night. Valentina was sitting in the lounge area, her small hands gripping the straps of her backpack, her hazel eyes darting nervously around. She looked up the moment she saw him, relief flickering across her face. "Are we leaving?" she asked immediately. Enrique nodded. "Yes." He could tell she was uneasy. She had been running from something for a long time, living in fear since the night of the fire. And now, she must have felt it too, that unseen danger pressing closer. Without another word, he guided her toward the exit, where his driver was already waiting. As soon as they stepped outside, Enrique's instincts screamed. A black SUV was idling across the street. Tinted windows, engine running. Enrique's blood ran cold. The same car, the same presence from last night. The moment they reached the Bentley, the SUV's headlights flashed on. The car lurched forward. "Get in," Enrique ordered, shoving Valentina into the back seat as the driver floored the gas. The Bentley shot forward just as the SUV veered sharply into traffic, right on their tail. The city blurred past them as they weaved through the streets, tires screeching, horns blaring. Enrique's pulse pounded, but his mind remained sharp. Valentina clutched onto the seat, eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" "Hold on," Enrique said, his voice steady. The SUV closed the distance. Enrique caught a glimpse of masked men inside, one of them rolling down the window. Then, a gunshot rang out. The bullet shattered the back windshield, glass spraying everywhere. "Go faster," Enrique snapped at the driver. They swerved onto the Brooklyn Bridge, traffic thinning out as they sped toward the water. The SUV didn't let up. Another shot pierced the side mirror. Enrique's driver swore under his breath, gripping the wheel tighter. "We're not gonna outrun them," Mark's voice crackled through Enrique's earpiece. "We need a plan." Enrique's mind worked fast. The bridge, the lanes were wide open. They could use that. "Drive toward the barricades ahead," Enrique ordered. The driver didn't question him. He veered left, heading straight for the concrete barriers separating the bridge lanes. The SUV followed, faster, more aggressive. Enrique saw their opportunity. At the last second, the Bentley jerked right, barely missing the barricade. The SUV wasn't so lucky. The driver reacted too late. The vehicle clipped the edge of the barrier at full speed, spinning out of control before slamming into the guardrail. The impact sent the SUV teetering. For a second, it hung there, half over the edge of the bridge. Then, with a final groan of metal, it dropped, disappearing into the dark waters below. A stunned silence filled the car. Enrique's driver slowed down, breathing heavily. "Jesus," he muttered. Valentina was shaking, her hands gripping her backpack so tight her knuckles turned white. She turned to Enrique, eyes filled with fear. "Who were they?" she whispered. Enrique didn't answer right away. He already knew. Luis had just made his move, and now it was his turn to strike back. By the time they reached Enrique's penthouse, his team was already in motion. Mark had doubled the security, men stationed at every entrance, surveillance feeds monitored 24/7. Enrique didn't take chances. Not anymore. Valentina sat curled up on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her, staring at the city skyline. She had barely spoken since the chase. Enrique poured himself a drink, then sat across from her. "They won't touch you again," he said firmly. She looked at him, her voice small. "You don't know that." He met her gaze, unwavering, because he was going to end this. Luis had escalated things to a level that couldn't be ignored. This wasn't just about old betrayals anymore. It was a war. The tension inside Enrique's penthouse was thick, an unspoken storm brewing beneath the surface. He stood by the window, staring down at the city below, the weight of the past few days pressing against his chest. Luis had crossed a line, one that could never be undone. He had sent men to kill him, to kill Valentina. It was a declaration of war. Mark entered the room, his expression unreadable, but Enrique knew the man well enough to sense the urgency in his stance. "It's done," Mark said, setting a folder on the table. "Everything we have on Luis, the missing funds, the offshore accounts, the connections to those finance executives. I sent copies to the FBI this morning." Enrique turned from the window, his eyes sharp. "And?" "They're moving on it," Mark confirmed. "But you know how this works. It'll take time before they act. Luis still thinks he has the upper hand. A slow, calculated smirk crossed Enrique's face. Then we make sure he doesn't. The boardroom at Carter International was filled with tension. The city skyline framed the windows behind Enrique as he sat at the head of the long mahogany table. The entire executive team was there, along with the most powerful investors in the company. Luis sat near the far end, acting as if nothing was out of the ordinary. He wore his usual smirk, the kind that had fooled too many people for too long. But Enrique saw through it. He had always seen through it. Enrique leaned forward, his fingers tapping against the polished wood. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth, controlled, "we have a problem, a very serious one." Murmurs passed through the room. Luis let out a short, unimpressed laugh. "Oh, Enrique, you always know how to dramatize a situation." Enrique ignored him. He turned toward Mark, who handed out copies of the documents. For the past several years, Luis Carter has been funneling company funds into offshore accounts. Millions have been drained, laundered, and hidden under the guise of business expenses. The room fell silent. Luis's smirk flickered, but he kept his composure. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Enrique arched an eyebrow, tossing another document in front of him. "Because the numbers say otherwise." One of the board members, a silver-haired man in his 60s, adjusted his glasses and skimmed the reports. "Luis," he said slowly, "these transactions, they're linked directly to your accounts." Luis sat back, his expression unreadable. "This is a setup." "No," Enrique countered. "This is the truth." He let the weight of the moment settle before delivering the final blow. "And the FBI's already investigating." That did it. Panic flashed in Luis's eyes, barely noticeable, but Enrique caught it. He knew his cousin too well. Luis had thought he was untouchable. He wasn't. One by one, the board members turned to each other, whispering. The investors exchanged uneasy glances. Then, the chairman of the board spoke, his voice firm. "Effective immediately, Luis Carter is stripped of all executive authority within Carter International. A full audit will be conducted, and if we find any further criminal activity, legal action will follow." Luis's face darkened. His fingers curled into fists, but he forced a breathless laugh. "You think this is over?" His gaze locked onto Enrique, filled with hatred. "You think you've won?" Enrique leaned back, his expression unshaken. "I don't think. I know." For the first time, Luis had no comeback. He had been outmaneuvered. But Enrique wasn't a fool. He knew men like Luis never went down without a fight. That night, Enrique felt it before it happened. Something was wrong. He had returned to his penthouse, expecting to find Valentina safely inside. But as soon as he walked through the door, the eerie silence sent a chill down his spine. His security team was supposed to be stationed at every entrance. They were gone. His pulse pounded as he scanned the room, his stomach twisting. Something wasn't right. Then he saw it. On the coffee table, where Valentina's backpack had been just hours ago, was a single note. In bold, sharp letters, it read, "We're not done yet. You know where to find me. Luis." Enrique's breath left his lungs like ice. His fingers clenched around the note as a deep, raw fury coiled in his chest. The city was a blur as Enrique's car tore through the streets, his grip on the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. The note Luis had left burned in his mind, a taunting reminder that this wasn't over. That bastard had taken Valentina, and Enrique knew exactly what that meant. Luis was making his final move, a desperate attempt to regain control. But he had made one critical mistake. He had given Enrique a reason to end this once and for all. Mark's voice crackled through the earpiece. "We tracked his last known location. There's an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district. Security cameras picked up a convoy of black SUVs heading that way an hour ago." Enrique didn't hesitate. "Send backup." "Already on it," Mark assured him. But Enrique, Luis is dangerous. He has men, and they won't hesitate to kill. Neither would he. The night air was thick, heavy with tension, as Enrique stood outside the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was an old shipping facility, long forgotten, its rusted exterior barely visible under the dim glow of the moon. His grip tightened around the gun holstered at his side, his heart hammering in his chest, but his mind was ice cold. Enrique had spent the past few hours tracing Luis's movements, digging into every connection, every favor, every lead, and now he was here, alone, by choice. He didn't trust the police to handle this. He couldn't risk losing Valentina the way he lost Teresa. A single light flickered inside the warehouse, casting eerie shadows against the cracked concrete walls. Enrique moved swiftly, his every step measured. He knew Luis had men. He knew this was a trap, but none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was Valentina. As soon as he stepped inside, a voice echoed from above. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Enrique's eyes darted to the steel beams overhead. Luis stood on the second level, leaning against the railing, a gun in one hand, a sickening smirk on his face. And next to him, Valentina. She was tied to a chair, her small frame trembling, but her eyes were alert, filled with defiance. She hadn't given up. Enrique's blood boiled. "Let her go, Luis," he said, his voice deathly calm. Luis chuckled, shaking his head. "You still don't get it, do you? You think this is about money? About some petty corporate betrayal?" He took a slow step forward, dragging his gun along the railing. "I've spent my entire life cleaning up after you, watching you take everything while I got nothing, and you never even noticed." Enrique didn't blink. He knew Luis's game. He knew his cousin wanted him angry, reckless. But Enrique had spent too many years mastering his emotions. "You stole from me," Enrique said. "You killed Teresa, and now you've taken Valentina. You think I'm going to let that slide?" Luis tilted his head, mock amusement dancing in his eyes. "Oh, Enrique," he sighed, "you don't let anything happen. You've just been lucky." His grip on the gun tightened. "And your luck runs out tonight." Before Enrique could react, Luis nodded toward the shadows. A gunshot rang out. Enrique dived behind a stack of crates just as bullets tore through the air. Luis's men emerged from the darkness, firing relentlessly. Enrique moved fast, precise, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Years of calculated business deals had given him a sharp mind, but years of surviving in ruthless environments had given him something even more valuable, the ability to adapt. One by one, Luis's men fell. The warehouse echoed with the sound of gunfire. Then, silence. Enrique's breath was steady as he stepped forward, his gun still raised. Up above, Luis clapped slowly, mockingly. "Well done," he mused. "I suppose I should have expected that from you." Enrique started up the rusted staircase toward him, his every step deliberate. Luis didn't move. He was waiting. When Enrique reached the top, they stood face to face for the first time in years. "You're not walking away from this," Enrique said. Luis smirked. "Neither are you." He lunged. The impact sent both men crashing into the railing. The gun clattered to the floor. They grappled violently, each move filled with years of resentment, of old wounds never healed. Luis threw a wild punch, but Enrique dodged, slamming his fist into his cousin's ribs. Luis stumbled but didn't fall. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You've been playing my game this whole time. I've controlled your life from the start." Enrique grabbed him by the collar, forcing him backward. "Then let me end it." Luis lunged again, but his foot slipped. The rotten floorboards gave way beneath him. For a split second, his eyes went wide. Then he was gone. Luis plummeted through the broken beams, his body hitting the concrete below with a sickening thud. He didn't move. Enrique exhaled, his chest heaving. It was over. The warehouse was silent, except for the ragged breathing of Valentina. Enrique turned, quickly untying the ropes around her wrists. The moment she was free, She threw herself into his arms. "I knew you'd come," she whispered against his chest. Enrique closed his eyes briefly, pressing a hand against the back of her head. "Always." He pulled back slightly, scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "Just scared." Enrique's jaw tightened. He had been scared too, but he didn't say it. Instead, he placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "It's over." Valentina swallowed hard. "Is he?" Enrique glanced toward Luis's lifeless body below. "Yes." She didn't look away, but she didn't say anything either. After a long moment, she simply nodded. Enrique took her hand, leading her toward the exit. The night air felt lighter as they stepped outside. The nightmare was finally over. The weight of the past few days still clung to Enrique as he sat in the towering glass office of Carter International, staring down at the city below. The view from his penthouse had always made him feel powerful, untouchable, but tonight it felt different. The war was over. Luis was gone. But the pieces left behind still had to be cleaned up. The FBI had moved quickly after Enrique submitted the evidence against Luis and his financial backers. Within 48 hours, federal agents had raided offices, seized assets, and arrested half a dozen executives tied to the embezzlement scheme. Enrique hadn't been surprised when reports came in that Luis had more than one accomplice. The financial empire they had tried to build was built on fraud, and now it was crumbling. Mark entered the office, a thick folder in hand. FBI finished the final sweep. Luis's offshore accounts have been frozen. His allies are either in custody or on the run. He placed the folder down on the desk. "You're officially in the clear." Enrique barely glanced at the paperwork. He had won. But for the first time in his life, victory felt hollow. He had spent years building this company, shaping it into an empire. Yet now he found himself wondering if any of it had ever truly mattered. Valentina. She had come into his life like a force of nature, dragging the past back into the present, forcing him to confront the ghosts he had spent years burying. And now, because of her, he saw the world differently. The man who once only cared about profit margins and market shares had found something far more important. Mark must have sensed the shift in Enrique's mood. "What's next?" he asked carefully. Enrique leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly against the desk. Then, he made his decision. 2 days later, the entire executive board gathered in the same conference room. The tension in the air was different now. There was no fear, no uncertainty, just anticipation. Enrique stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding as always. But there was something calmer about him now, something more certain. "I built this company from the ground up," he began. "I fought for it. I bled for it. And I've spent the past decade making sure it became one of the most powerful corporations in the world." He let his gaze sweep over the room. "But today, I'm making a different choice." Murmurs broke out among the executives, but Enrique didn't let them linger. "I'm stepping down as CEO of Carter International," he announced. Silence. Then, voices rose in shock. One of the board members leaned forward, his expression one of disbelief. "Mr. Carter, surely, after everything—" Enrique raised a hand, cutting him off. "I don't need to explain myself. The company will continue to thrive. A new CEO will be appointed, and I'll retain my shares. But my time here is done." A long pause. Then the chairman of the board finally spoke. "If you're stepping away, what exactly do you plan to do?" Enrique exhaled, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders. "I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago," he said. "I'm going to make things right." The paperwork was filed, the transition process set in motion. Within a week, Enrique Carter was no longer the most powerful CEO in New York. He was just a man with unfinished business and a new purpose. But before anything else, there was one final step. The judge's office was quiet as Enrique sat beside Valentina, the legal documents spread out before them. She was holding his hand, gripping it tightly, her small fingers wrapped around his like she was afraid to let go. The judge looked over the papers once more before glancing up at Enrique. "You're absolutely certain about this?" Enrique didn't hesitate. "Yes." The judge nodded and signed the last document. Then she looked at Valentina. "Congratulations, young lady. It's official." Valentina turned to Enrique, her eyes wide. "So, that means—" He squeezed her hand. "That means you're my daughter, legally, permanently." For the first time in days, her entire face lit up. She launched herself into his arms, burying her face against his chest. I thought maybe you'd change your mind," she whispered. "Never," Enrique murmured, holding her tight. "You're home now, Valentina, and you always will be." It was strange, he thought. He had spent his entire life chasing power, success, money, and yet, in this moment, signing a single piece of paper to adopt a little girl was the greatest thing he had ever done. As they walked out of the courthouse together, for the first time in years, Enrique Carter felt truly free. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth as Enrique and Valentina walked through the quiet cemetery on the outskirts of the city. The towering oaks swayed gently in the breeze, their golden and russet leaves drifting onto the worn stone paths. It was a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed their lives in the past few weeks. Valentina walked ahead, her small fingers tightly clutching a bouquet of white lilies. She moved with purpose, her steps measured, but Enrique could sense the tension in her. She hadn't said much on the way here, and even now, she was lost in her own thoughts. He let her lead, keeping a respectful distance as she wove through the maze of gravestones, until finally, she stopped. Enrique followed her gaze, his breath catching as he read the name etched into the polished granite. Teresa Davis, beloved mother and daughter, 1986 to 2024. The simplicity of the inscription felt like an injustice to the life she had lived, to the love she had given. He had spent years believing Teresa had abandoned him, that she had chosen a life without him. Now, standing at her grave, he knew the truth. She had never stopped loving him, never stopped fighting for a way back. And in the end, it had cost her everything. Valentina knelt beside the grave, placing the lilies carefully in front of the headstone. She ran her fingers over the engraved letters, as if trying to hold on to something tangible, something real. "She used to tell me stories about you," she said quietly, still looking at the stone. "She never said your name, but I knew she loved you. She would talk about this man she once knew, how he was strong, how he never let anything stop him." Valentina swallowed, her voice faltering. "I used to think he wasn't real, just something she made up to make herself feel better." Enrique's chest tightened. "And now?" She turned to look at him, her hazel eyes filled with something deep, something raw. "Now I know she was telling the truth." Enrique knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I should have been there," he admitted. The words were heavy, weighed down by regret. "If I had known, if I had just looked harder." Valentina shook her head. "She never blamed you." That made it worse. Silence stretched between them as they both stared at the grave, lost in different memories of the same woman. Teresa had been the one constant in both of their lives, and now she was gone, taken too soon, stolen by greed and power. After a long moment, Valentina let out a slow breath. "I used to come here alone," she admitted. "After the fire, after I had nowhere else to go. I'd sit here for hours, just talking to her, pretending she could hear me." She hesitated, then looked up at him. "But now, I don't feel so alone anymore." Enrique felt something inside him shift This wasn't just about avenging Teresa anymore. It wasn't about taking down Luis or reclaiming his company or proving he had won. This was about something bigger. He had spent his entire life accumulating wealth, power, influence. But none of it had mattered when it truly counted. It hadn't brought Teresa back. It hadn't stopped Luis from destroying everything in his path. And it hadn't saved Valentina from growing up alone. But he could change that. He could make sure no one else had to live through what they had. Standing, he looked down at Teresa's grave one last time. He couldn't change the past, but he could build something that honored her. He turned to Valentina. "I want to show you something." She frowned in confusion, but nodded. They drove back into the city in silence, but it wasn't the heavy, sorrowful silence from before. It was something different, something filled with purpose. When the car finally pulled up outside a vacant lot in the Bronx, Valentina gave him a puzzled look. "What is this place?" she asked, as they stepped onto the cracked pavement. Enrique looked around, taking in the rundown building that once housed a community center, a place for struggling families, for single mothers like Teresa. But it had been shut down years ago, left to decay. "It used to be a shelter," Enrique explained, "a place for people who had nowhere else to go." Valentina hesitated. "Like me?" He nodded. She turned, taking in the abandoned building with new eyes. "You told me Teresa never stopped believing in me," Enrique continued, "that even after everything, she still thought I was a good man." He exhaled, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "I don't know if she was right, but I do know I have the power to help people like her, like you." Valentina's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. "You're going to fix this place." "Not just fix it," Enrique corrected. "I'm going to turn it into something better, a foundation for women and children who need help, who need protection, who need a chance." He let the idea settle before adding, "I'm going to name it after her." For the first time since they left the cemetery, Valentina smiled. "She would have liked that," she said softly. Enrique studied her for a moment. "You would too, wouldn't you?" She hesitated, then nodded. That was all the confirmation he needed. The plans for the Teresa Foundation came together quickly. Enrique poured everything into it, his money, his connections, his influence. Within weeks, architects were finalizing blueprints, contractors were hired, and donors lined up to support the project. Word spread fast. The media picked up the story, painting Enrique as a billionaire, finally using his wealth for something meaningful. But Enrique didn't care about the headlines. For the first time in his life, he wasn't doing this for the sake of business. He was doing this because it was the right thing to do. Valentina was there every step of the way, watching as the vacant lot transformed into something alive, something with purpose. She met the families who would one day call this place their home, listened to their stories, and for the first time, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. Enrique watched her grow into her new life, no longer just a lost child in the shadows of the city, but a part of something bigger. One afternoon, as they stood outside the construction site, Valentina turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think she'd be proud?" Enrique didn't hesitate. "I know she would." She smiled again, looking at the building that would soon bear her mother's name. And for the first time since this journey began, Enrique knew he had finally done something that truly mattered. The crisp autumn air carried a sense of renewal as Enrique stood outside the Teresa Foundation's first shelter, watching the final touches being put in place. The large brick building, once abandoned, had been fully restored, a safe haven for children who had nowhere else to go. The bold letters above the entrance read, "The Teresa Center," a tribute to the woman who had taught him what love was before it was cruelly taken away. He felt a small hand slip into his, breaking his thoughts. Valentina stood beside him, her wide eyes taking in the sight before her. She had been quiet on the drive over, but Enrique knew this meant more to her than she could put into words. "You really did it," she whispered. He looked down at her, squeezing her hand. "We did it." She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, he saw something in her expression that had been missing since the night he met her. Peace. Inside the shelter, children of all ages ran through the halls, playing, laughing. Some had been abandoned, others had fled abusive homes. But here, they were safe. They were wanted. Volunteers worked tirelessly, preparing meals, organizing donations, ensuring that each child had a bed to sleep in, a warm meal, and, most importantly, hope. Valentina's steps slowed as she spotted a young boy sitting alone in the corner, clutching a tattered blanket. He couldn't have been older than 5. His clothes were too big, his shoes worn out, his eyes filled with the kind of pain she knew all too well. Without hesitation, Valentina reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, delicate flower, one she had picked earlier that morning. She walked up to the boy and gently placed it in his hand. The boy blinked at her, hesitant at first. Then, his fingers curled around the stem, holding it close, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Enrique watched from a distance, his chest tightening. That had been her. Just weeks ago, that had been Valentina, a child alone, lost, desperate for kindness, and now, she was the one giving it. She turned back toward Enrique, her expression soft but strong, as if she finally understood something she hadn't before. He gave her a small nod, his silent way of saying he was proud of her. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the New York skyline, Enrique and Valentina sat together on a park bench, watching the city light up. The world felt different now. It wasn't just about power or money anymore. For the first time in his life, Enrique understood what it meant to truly live. Valentina leaned her head against his arm, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Dad, for not leaving me." Enrique swallowed hard. Of all the things he had achieved, this moment was the greatest. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her close as the city stretched before them. Because sometimes, you had to lose everything to understand what really mattered. And Enrique Carter had finally found his way home.